Okay. And we are live. Hello, everybody who will be watching this later, because I know nobody's watching right now. And welcome to another installment of the Pale Galilean. So I'm streaming very, very late, and the reason for that particularly is simply due to the fact that my schedule was completely swamped for today, and I needed some downtime. Otherwise, I was just going to be nodding out here during this presentation, and that would not make for a good one. And also, I'm realizing that my avatar is not what I want. Let's go old school. Old school is better. All right, so there are already a few comments on here. Let's go over those first. Everybody's really asking if I'm there. And yeah, so if anyone's wondering why I wasn't on at 11:15 like I promised, well, you know why. Okay, I don't expect anybody to be watching now, and that's a little sad, but regardless, we shall do this. Let me share something here. Get that ready. Aha, here we are. Okay. Now, first, to announce what we're doing, we are going over a particular video by John Macarthur that is embarrassingly bad pseudohistory. Not bad in so much as what he says is egregiously false, as much as how he really wants to attempt to portray this particular historical figure, who is Jan Hus, or anglicized John Hus. Now, John Hus was considered a proto-Protestant reformer, specifically someone who provided a foundation, more or less, for the Protestant Reformation to facilitate itself. However, every historian knows, and every valid historian knows, it is a complete mistake to refer to this man as a Protestant, because he never was. Like, he just wasn't. No one can really make that argument consistently. And so, what we're going to do, we're going to respond to this video where John Macarthur says things. This I actually have to thank Diego for, and so I thank you for the suggestion, Diego. And now we are going to we're going to do this. We are going to respond to the video by John Macarthur here. It's actually uploaded by somebody else, not John Macarthur precisely. It's Grace Ministry NZ. I'm going to assume that means New Zealand or something like that. This channel has 2,150 subscribers, and that is 2,000 and that's 2,000 too many. Anyway, without further delay, good jokes, Ryan. Okay, without further delay, we're going to start the video, I suppose. I don't think there's any more introduction I need to do here. Anyway, before we watch the video, and maybe I'll interrupt, or maybe we'll go through the 5 minutes, so we'll see what happens. I want the people watching this to keep this in the back of their mind, that Jan Hus was not a Protestant. So, consider this fact with what John Macarthur is saying about him. Let's go.
The date was July 6th, 1415, pre-Reformation. The most powerful preacher of the Bible of his age, Jan Hus, had been condemned to death. Everybody knew about his preaching, at least in Prague and the surroundings, because he preached in Bethlehem Chapel, one of the great churches, if not the greatest, largest auditorium in that part of the world. And he preached the Bible. He wanted to make the Bible clear to the people.
Okay, let's stop there. Did he really want to make the Bible clear to the people? Was that his intent? Really? Because historians beg to differ. In fact, as to just demonstrate this, let me share the Wikipedia article here, because the fact is you don't need to go far to see that what's being said here isn't really true. So let me bring that one up. And here we are. Now I'm not going to go over what his early life, because that's not really how I would say pertinent to the conversation. The reason being is because before this he was a faithful son of the church. It was around the Avignon Schism that you see fissures start to change. In 1408, Charles University in Prague was divided by the Western Schism, in which Gregory XII of Rome and Benedict XIII in Avignon both claimed to be the Pope, or both claimed the papacy. Wenceslas felt that Gregory XII might interfere with his plans to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor. He denounced Gregory, ordered the clergy of Bohemia to observe a strict neutrality in the schism, and expected the same of the university. Archbishop Zajic remained faithful to Gregory. At the university, only scholars of the Bohemian nation, one of the four governing sections, with Hus of their leader, vowed neutrality. So it's very interesting. At the onset of this schism, which again would prove to be more terraformed to Jan Hus's beliefs, he took an aura of utter neutrality here. And that's not really what you'd expect from a reformer, would it? That really wanted to make the Bible clear to people. In 1409, Wenceslas summoned representatives of the four nations comprising the University of the Czech city of Kunta-Hora to demand the statements of allegiance. The Czech nation agreed, but the other three nations declined. The king then decreed that the Czech nation would have 3 votes in university affairs, and the German vote, composed of the former Bavarian, Saxon, and Polish nations, would have 1 vote in total. Due to the change in voting structure by May 1409, the German dean and rector were deposed and replaced by Czechs. The Palatin elector called to the Germans by his own university in Heidelberg, while the Margrave of Messine started a new university in Leipzig. It is estimated that over 1,000 students and masters left Prague. The immigrants also spread accusations of Bohemian heresy. So you essentially have a papal schism, and people are picking sides. By 1409, the Council of Pisa tried to the Council of Pisa tried to end the schism by electing Alexander V as Pope, but Gregory and Benedict did not submit. Alexander was declared anti-pope by Council of Constance in 1418. Hus and his followers in Wenceslas transferred the allegiance to Alexander V. Under pressure from King Wenceslas IV, Archbishop Zajic did the same. Zajic then lodged an accusation of ecclesiastical disturbances against Wycliffes in Prague with Alexander V. Or the term Wycliffites here should rather be called Lollards. That's typically the accepted name for Wycliffe's followers. Now, what needs to be understood here is that what is being laid down is ultimately, how should I say this? This is different from Martin Luther's experience. because Martin Luther's experience was made and forged with an understanding of rather how I'll put it, novel doctrines of Ecclesia and Scriptura, of sola fide and sola Scriptura. And what happens from this, from Martin Luther's own, from Martin Luther's zealotry towards these newfound doctrines, comes out the Reformation. And already this is different from Hus's experience, because Jan Hus, his start here, his start of heresy, you might argue, comes not from newfound doctrines that the Reformation held, but more from a misunderstanding or a disobedience of doctrines established in his day, not from their active denial, which is what sola fide and Scriptura would have to constitute. Now, here's interesting. Archbishop Zajic died in 1411, and with his death, the religious movement of Bohemia entered a new phase in which the disputes concerning indulgences assumed great importance. Hus spoke out against indulgences, but could not carry with him the men of the university. In 1412, a dispute took place on which the occasion, Hus delivered his address, Quasito Majesty Johannes Hus de Indulgentiatis. It was taken literally from the last chapter of Wycliffe's book De Ecclesia in his treatise De Absoluti e Pene di Culpa. I'm probably butchering these Latin phrases. Hus asserted that no pope or bishop had the right to take up the sword in the name of the church. He should pray for his enemies and bless those that curse him. A man obtains forgiveness for sins by true repentance, not money. Now, that is a reference to the sale of indulgences, which the church ultimately agreed with him on in the Council of Trent documents. The doctors of the theological faculty replied, but without success. As in, his faculty comrades made a response to him, and ultimately it did little to convince him. And you know what? In some ways understandable that he was right in this situation, as the Council of Trent itself would later declare. Continue. A few days afterwards, some of Hus's followers, led by Vokvoxa, I'm not going to pronounce that last name, burned the papal bulls. Hus, they said, should be obeyed rather than the church, which they considered a fraud of mob of adulterers and simonists. So we're going to stop it there, but now look at what's going on here. What we have, ladies and gentlemen, is a man that does not really care about having the Bible clear. That's not what he's trying to do. Jan Hus, more than anything else, is decrying the sale of indulgences and is decrying ecclesiastical action in the Crusades. The Bible doesn't even come up. And again, don't even trust my word or Wikipedia's word on it. Encyclopedia Britannica here, which I have up, says the same thing. It clearly says the same thing. So without even talking about the Council of Constance and his later execution, it's abundantly clear that what Hus is arguing against is going to be aspects of the papacy, sale of indulgences, and ecclesiastical actions of the Crusades. That's it. You don't get this idea that he wanted to make the Bible clear to all. Where and when? Now, I think if I remember correctly, John Hus, wrote a Bible in a vernacular language. And again, that was technically a crime in his day from where he was. But this was not the reason he was executed. It just added to the reasons, sure, but it's not the reason. And so John Macarthur here wants to make Jan Hus look more like Martin Luther than Jan Hus cared to be. And there's a term for that. It's called pseudohistory. Let's continue.
They condemned him to death for doing that. Why? 3 things. 1, he said that every believer is a part of the church. 2, he said the Bible is the sole authority. But mostly, they condemned him for saying Jesus Christ is the head of his church.
Now, as we already articulated earlier, none of that is true. That is all of it is BS. First of all, Jan Hus did not believe the Bible was the sole authority in the way John Macarthur believes it to be. Jan Hus, in fact, would have did not have a problem with reconciliation to a priest. He didn't have a problem with indulgences necessarily. He hated their sale. He absolutely believed in the authority of your local priest. In fact, not only that, but as the article cites here in Wikipedia, and that is hold on, we're gonna grab. Yeah, in fact, according to Dr. Philip Schaff of in the new Schaff Herzog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge of Jan Hus, what Jan Hus decried was essentially the fact that all of the bishops and priests, and to the Pope to a degree, are simonists. They are given to selling off their religious offices, and so what has to happen, therefore, they cannot be trusted, so to speak. So, what does he say? We can't obey the clergy as it is, but the papal bulls must be obeyed. That's what he believed. He decried his own camp for burning papal bulls by, I think, was it Alexander V for what we just read? In any case, what is going on here is something that, how should I say this? This is something that John Macarthur would not be able to reconcile himself with. John Macarthur would not accept this. He would say, burn the papal bulls too, along with every priest, every bishop, or rather their authority specifically. John Macarthur would want the priests and the bishops to be overthrown, and only uneducated Bible preachers to be in the pulpit. That's what John Macarthur would want. That's not at all, in any way, shape, or form, what Jan Hus wanted. He never wanted to preach the Bible. He never told you that it was the sole authority. And what's the other crap he said here? Hold on.
He said that every believer is a part of the church.
Sure he did, and nobody disputed that. Every Catholic knew in 1419, when he was executed, that every Catholic was a part of the church. Every member is a part of the church. This doesn't even appear in his biographies. So I'm not sure. So when John Macarthur says this is just a lie, to be quite honest, to be quite frank. It's not true. Jan Hus did not, how put it? Jan Hus did not say this because there was nobody that denied that. Nobody denied that. And what we quickly come to find here from this scene is just John Macarthur's utter dishonesty on display. And there's no charitable way of saying it. There's no charitable way. When John Macarthur says these things, he is saying this as a utterly biased man that is allowing his bias to overcome his integrity and honesty. And I think this reason alone sums it up. Now, the third reason.
2, he said the Bible is the sole authority, but mostly they condemned him for saying Jesus Christ is the head of his church.
Yeah, no one condemned him for saying that. They condemned him for not listening to direct commands by ecclesial authorities. They condemned him for other reasons, specifically. Actually, let's look that up here. Let's see. Yeah, here's from the article. On June 1415, he was tried for the first time and transferred to a Franciscan monastery where he spent the last weeks of his life. Extracts from his works were read and witnesses were heard. He refused all formal submission, but declared himself willing to recant his errors if should he be proven him from the Bible. Hus conceded his veneration of Wycliffe and said that his only wish for the soul was that some might attain unto that place where Wycliffe was. On the other hand, having denied having defended Wycliffe's doctrine of the Lord's Supper and of the 45 Articles, he had only opposed their summary condemnation. King Sigismund admonished him to deliver himself up to the mercy of the council, and did not desire to protect a heretic. So, where exactly is Hus saying that you know what, it is the Bible alone that is the authority? Oh, and Jesus Christ is the head of his church, and I'll be put to death for that too. Where's that being said here? Now, what was really going on is that Jan Hus had problems with the current pope, or in this case, the pope and the two other anti-popes. This is during the Avignon papacy. And what's going on here then is something infinitely more. It's something infinitely. How should I say this? This is something infinitely more nuanced and complex than John Macarthur has the education to convey. Either the education or the honesty, one of the two. And frankly, one might as well be the other with individuals such as him at the moment. Let's continue.
The truth that Christ is Lord of his church may sound somewhat benign to a casual listener in our generation, but the struggle for that truth has come to us through the ages on a sea of blood, as the life and death of Jan Hus so vividly illustrates. In his famous book on the church called De Ecclesia, Hus wrote simply, "The Pope is not the head, nor are the cardinals the whole body of the church, for Christ alone is the head of the church." He explained that where the word of the Pope came into conflict with the word of Christ, believers were bound to submit to the scriptures and obey the Lord, for only he is the true king and ruler. Hus's candor cost him his life, but the flames lit on the day he died would pale in comparison to the fires of Reformation that he sparked.
Okay, let us respond to that little tidbit. Okay, first of all, there's a problem there because as even Encyclopedia Britannica says, Jan Hus did not believe in this the way that Macarthur does. While certainly he had a high veneration for the Bible, as do Catholics today, he did not believe in sola scriptura as clearly as John Macarthur is attempting to make him sound here. And just listen to the happy-go-lucky church music in the background here talking about this, as if this guy is on his side, and he's not. Here's the fact of the matter. He wants to try to appeal to Jan Hus to say that, you know what, Jan Hus believed in sola scriptura. Okay, that's utter nonsense, but let's just give him the benefit of the doubt and say, for argument's sake, this is correct. This is a man that still held to the authority of a pope, and only said where the Pope's word comes in conflict with the Bible should be believed. Now, this was debated in the church even before and after Jan Hus. So he's not really bringing up any insightful sage-like articulations here. This is being debated in his time, before his time, and after his time. So he's not coming up with anything controversial in that image. So this is a man that, by and large, did not object to the authority of a pope, or even bishops, only to where they could discernibly be in contrast and in contradiction against the scriptures. Now, this is something that even the First and Second Vatican Council affirms too, although to a more nuanced degree than Hus did. So Hus isn't exactly wrong for saying this particularly. History would prove his concerns correct. But Hus also believed in the true presence of the Eucharist, something Macarthur denies. He also believed that there was something called apostolic succession, that is, the apostles laid their authority down to be inherited by others, by their successors, the priests, bishops, and popes. This is a man that also strongly believed in the sacrament of reconciliation, which you would have to go to a priest to get the stain of mortal sin removed. And I don't know this, but I don't even think John Macarthur believes one can sin mortally. For him, all sins are mortal. This is also a man that was Catholic in almost every discernible sense of the word. He was not a Protestant reformer. He wasn't. He just wasn't. And with that, I think I've kind of preached on this hard enough. We should continue.
100 years later, Hus's writings were discovered by a monk named Martin Luther. Emboldened by what he read and compelled by his study of the Bible, the German reformer took up the fight for Christ's honor as true head of the church. As Luther himself explained, the chief cause that I fell out with the Pope was this: the Pope boasted that he was the head of the church. But as Luther and the other reformers examined the New Testament, they became unshakably convinced that Jesus Christ alone is the Lord of the church. 3 centuries later,
to be yeah, Jamie, we're still friends. How you do? What are you doing up so late? I didn't know your dad was German Bohemian then. Okay, Jamie. Anyway, moving on. Okay. So, Jan and Janet, I get it. Anyway, what's going on here now what's going on here in the video, no doubt Jan Hus believed when Jan Hus says these things regarding the Pope, that only Jesus Christ is the head of the church. He's saying this not to deny the papacy, but in his own objections, he believes the papacy are doing things that contradict Christ. Therefore, he's not saying the Pope doesn't have valid authority to an extent Jan Hus did. In fact, Jan Hus even allied himself with the Pope during the early years of the schism. So it's not that he doesn't believe that the popes don't have legitimacy. It is simply that he saw the actions of the Pope as being against scriptures. And he may have been right, especially in the sale of indulgences, but he also might have been wrong. But the point is, he does not say these things as Martin Luther later would. He does not say these things as a condemnation of the idea of a papacy, but merely the condemnation of what the Pope is doing. That is a distinction John Macarthur either does not have the education or the integrity to make clear. Let's continue.
Later, the British preacher Charles Spurgeon summed up that Reformation conviction with these words. The Church of God, in a very special manner, calls Jesus our Lord, for there is not, and there cannot be, any head of the Church except the Lord Jesus Christ. It is awful blasphemy for any man on earth to call himself Christ's vicar and the head of the Church. And it is a usurpation of the crown rights of King Jesus for any king or queen to be called the head of the Church. For the true Church of Jesus Christ can have no head but Jesus Christ himself.
Okay, that's what Charles Spurgeon said. What did Jan Hus say? Now, this might be Charles Spurgeon's opinion, and I certainly would not agree that Charles Spurgeon was rabidly anti-Catholic and just basically every bit as uneducated in his pronouncements as modern-day Baptists are. But Spurgeon's opinion is not Jan Hus's. Jan Hus would not have held the opinion that Spurgeon did. Spurgeon denies the office of the papacy and the bishop and the priest outright. That's not something Jan Hus in his wildest fever dream would do. Once again, not only is he trying to make a comparison between Luther and Hus, where there is no comparison, he's trying to make a comparison between Hus and Spurgeon. And the truth is, Jan Hus did not believe the things Spurgeon did. In fact, Jan Hus believed in the authority of priests and bishops and popes. He might have wanted to argue against the authorities in so much that they contradicted what he saw in Scripture. But he never contradicted their authority completely or utterly, like what we see in the next generations. Similarly, we see Jan Hus believing in the true presence of the Eucharist. Now, in his day, this would have been transubstantiation. Okay, this would have been, or actually, not that would have been the most popular view, but transubstantiation would have been dogmatized just nary a century later in the Council of Trent documents. So now, what's going on? What's going on here is that how do I want to put this? Yes, Jan Hus believed in things utterly irreconcilable with John Macarthur and Martin Luther and Charles Spurgeon. In fact, if these three men, if John Macarthur, if Charles Spurgeon, if Martin Luther went back in time into Jan Hus's day, as they were in their final formative years in their rebellion of the Reformation, Jan Hus would not have hesitated to burn all three men at the stake. Because what is something else Jan Hus does not object to? He never objects to the burning of heretics. Ever. Now, this may be uncomfortable to many modern listeners, especially with those of with Protestant leanings and affiliations. But Jan Hus is not your friend. You might have taken some of his material and been inspired by it, but he would not have liked you. He would have burned you at the stake because he did not object to that practice. Never did. What Jan Hus objected to was something far more complex and nuanced than what has been demonstrated here. In fact, here's the thing. not even got questions, that that absolute garbage website are coming to the conclusions that Macarthur is. That should give you some room for thought. And I think I'll show you the website here, but for now, let's meet up and continue.
Charles Spurgeon, true believers throughout history have always been characterized by a wholehearted devotion to the church's true head, the Lord Jesus Christ. Jan Hus and the reformers who came after him understood this, which is why they broke away from the corrupt Roman Catholic system.
Okay, now, did Jan Hus really believe that? Let's rewind here and really get a sense of what he's saying.
Jan Hus and the reformers who came after him understood this, which is why they broke away from the corrupt Roman Catholic system. Wholehearted devotion to the church's true head, the Lord Jesus Christ.
And when he says this, he means this in terms of rejecting the papacy. Except Jan Hus never rejected the papacy. Ever. Correct, Jamie. He was strong on predestination. Absolutely. Now, that is a road that he and John Calvin could walk down to completion from beginning to end. Where he had to part ways was in understandings of, how would I say this? He had to part ways with them in understanding of the bishops, popes, and priests. He had to part ways in his understanding of the Eucharist, in the understanding of what baptism is. That is to say, Jan Hus did not object to there being a pope. He didn't. He objected to what the Pope was doing, which seemed to be in conflict with the Bible. And from this, John Macarthur infers sola scriptura. And from this, infers that he was anti-papal. That's just not true. He was against some aspects of the papacy, just as some bishops before the First Vatican Council objected to some aspects of it then, what was being pronounced in papal infallibility. But he was never against the office of Pope. And that is what Jan Hus, that's what John Macarthur wants him to think, or wants to pronounce him as. Let's see, hold on. Do you think that anyone could say whoever will be saved, in a sense? I'm not sure what that necessarily means, I don't know. Luther didn't even prefer to destroy the church. Correct. Now, Luther ended up doing so. He ended up adopting some doctrines that were utterly irreconcilable to the church, that it made a split. Of course, we know this as sola scriptura and sola fide. But Luther also didn't believe in apostolic succession. He didn't. If he did, then the Lutheran Church would have valid priests and bishops. They don't. They don't have valid apostolic succession because Lutheran preachers and Lutheran priests broke off to become their own without ever receiving the laying on of hands or the ordinations that are required to be valid priests. So I would say that Luther didn't see himself as destroying the church, but I definitely think that's what it did, regardless of his intent. Now, next I want to bring John Macarthur's idea, where they supposedly were rebelling against the Roman Catholic system. That isn't just simply his pure bigotry on display there. The fact of the matter is, by referring to us as a system and not a church, is simply something to delegitimize us as an ecclesial body. I guess that's what he would do, but especially someone as dishonest as him would have no problem doing. But the fact of the matter is, by using that terminology, you clearly see where this utter pseudo-history is coming from, and it is coming from a complete lack of integrity, that he has such a bias, such a vindictiveness against the church, that he refuses rather to talk about the church on her own terms by referring to her as a system instead of a church. He's committing blanket acts of bigotry here. Let's continue.
Certainly across the evangelical world, everybody gives lip service to Christ as the head of his church. We affirm the authority of his word. At least we say that. The real tragedy is that in practice, that just doesn't happen. If Christ is the head of his church, then his church should gather to hear him speak. He should be.
So, what he means to say that at least officially, Jesus Christ is the head of his church, but in practice, there are a lot of Protestants that don't practice this according to him. And you know what? To a sense, I would agree with his interpretation. There are a lot of Protestants that don't take Christianity seriously, much less Protestantism overall. But here's the thing about that, John. The issue with saying that, the issue with this criticism is that when you say that many people, at least in practice, don't believe Jesus Christ is the head of the church, that can only that nobody's surprised by that, because the Protestant Reformation provides the subjectivity by which that term, Jesus Christ is the head of the church, means absolutely nothing. You see, here's the fact of the matter. Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, no offense to Jamie Russell here, and Mormons, and many other heretical groups, and even Roman Catholics, all agree that Jesus Christ is the head of the church. No one disputes that. However, unlike the other groups here, the Catholic Church can authoritatively determine what that phrase means, and we have determined it. It means that Christ is the head of the church and placed authoritative bodies on earth for us to submit to, that have received his own authority. So the problem about that is that when you complain that, at least in practice, Protestants don't believe that Jesus Christ is the head of the church, oh no, they clearly do. It's just what that term means is like it's like nailing jelly to a wall. It means so many things to so many different people. For the Latter-day Saints, yeah, Jesus Christ is the head of their church, but also Jesus is simply one God of many, and if they obey the practices of the Mormon Church to a dotted I and cross T, what they will become is gods themselves, creator gods, that is. Now, with Jamie's experience here, he believes Jesus Christ is the head of the church, but also that does not how should I say this? That does not disqualify further prophets, such as Ellen White, for instance. Now, while I certainly would not agree Ellen White is a prophet, I can certainly understand how Jamie comes to those conclusions from the sheer subjectivity of that phrase. Here, Jamie wanted to say something specifically. What if I said they are all Catholic reprobates, accepting the authority of the Church to change the Sabbath, making their claim of sola scriptura dishonest? I don't quite know what you're trying to say here, Jamie. If you want to, how would I say this? Kind of make your question a bit more clear, because I'm too dumb to understand what you're saying here. And so what's going on here is Martin Luther, John Macarthur is proposing something that is utterly foreign to centuries before him. How he is framing Jan Hus isn't how Jan Hus saw himself. Not one bit. Okay. Let's see. Let me try to understand Jamie's question again. Okay, if I said they are all Catholic reprobates, accepting the authority of the Church to change the Sabbath, making their claim of Protestants, MacArthur, and HCT. Okay, so what if you said they are all Catholic I get it now. Okay, you're asking what if accepting these doctrines down here were making. I think I see what you're saying now. Okay, so let me kind of answer that for you. First of all, I don't know. I'm not familiar with Adventist doctrine, so I don't know what leg you'd have to stand on making that claim to begin with. I know Seventh-day Adventism is founded on this kind of knee-jerk fear of Catholicism. I know that much, but essentially, if you said that, accepting the church to change the Sabbath and making their claim of sola scriptura dishonest. Well, again, when I'm saying John Macarthur is claiming sola scriptura, I'm not saying him claiming it is dishonest, but him attempting to portray Jan Hus as being on his side and accepting it is dishonest. Okay, I've never heard this, actually. I've never heard, they say the Bible, oh, wait, I know what you're saying. Okay, they say the Bible is their authority, but keep Sunday. Okay. That's actually the thing, Jamie. By keeping the Bible your authority, again, what does that mean? Many Protestant sects have kept the Bible their authority, and they are irreconcilable distances apart from each other. On top of that, though, many of these sects hate each other. They do. Like John Macarthur and the Jehovah's Witnesses both make the Bible their authority, and yet one clearly hates the other. Why is this? Well, simply put, it is because what's going on is that the idea that the Bible is our ultimate authority and Jesus Christ is the head of the church and these other phrases, these are catchphrases, but they mean almost nothing. Or specifically, they mean too much to too many different people. People say these things, but apply so many different definitions to them that they cannot agree. And so what I would say to that, I would say you would have every authority to say that we are all Catholic reprobates, assuming you have the authority in your own church to do that. So if you want to say that we do not have the authority to change the Sabbath to Sunday, and I would argue that the change from Saturday to Sunday was seen in the apostolic age. It's not something the church did necessarily as much as the apostles did. And then by the time Constantine comes on the scene, this is essentially dogmatized. Now, accepting the authority of the church to change, so I think you would have every right to call us reprobates, given given whatever authority that your own church gives you to do that. But that's the problem, because if you're able to do that to me, then I'm able to do that to you, and we don't really get anywhere productive. That's why I do not go as far to say Seventh-day Adventists aren't Christian, although I will say there are insane problems in Adventist theology. I won't go as far to say that they're not Christians. Now, the problem about that is that because of these terms being used in so many different ways, that I don't have a way of speaking past the brick wall, nor do you have a way of speaking past against me, until Jesus Christ as the head of its church gets an authoritative definition. We won't. There's nothing you and I can say on this issue, and this is why I see Catholicism as superior to Protestantism. We have a ability to definitely give authoritative meanings to what these things mean, and so much that when we say that Jesus Christ is the head of the church, we can articulate and define what that means, whereas Protestants largely can't. And where they can is utterly limited to their own scope. Again, like the Seventh-day Adventists can only say Jesus Christ is the head of the church in regards to Seventh-day Adventist terminology. So that the same thing goes for Lutherans, for Mormons. The same thing goes for Jehovah's Witnesses, and those are the ones coming to mind at the moment. But the same thing goes for Calvinists, because oftentimes Jesus Christ is the head of the church is greatly influenced by the Westminster Confession of Faith. Let's see. Oh, hey Nick, what's going on? Well, again, I have yet to be convinced by that. I've heard people say that, and you know what? That's not necessarily something. How would I play this? This is not, the latter part is not something I would necessarily disagree with, of them being an occult. Again, I have yet to be convinced they're an occult, but I can affirm that they are Christians and yet an occult. But I do firmly believe they are Christians. They affirm a Trinity. They affirm Jesus Christ is the Son of God. They affirm He is Messiah. So many Christological teachings are in fact preserved in Seventh-day Adventism. Where I would part ways is definitely in ecclesiology, and as Nick points out here, the Sabbath. So no doubt there are huge problems with Adventist theology. But I don't necessarily have enough evidence, or none that's convinced me, to write them out of the ecclesia, the universal church. In this case, the invisible universal church. So I don't have enough to I don't have enough to make that judgment on my part. With that, we'll continue, and I just want to show you just how wrong Macarthur is then, because John Macarthur is utterly wrong on this issue that even Got Answers needs to push back on this. That garbage of a website needs to push back on this a bit. We will demonstrate that when we finish up here.
Be the sole authority in his church, and he speaks through his word. The church should be marked and noted by expository preaching, bringing the word of Christ to the people, by submission to his word, by worship of him. He should be the focus of our attention, the focus of our worship, and the authority by which we learn what it is that God wants us to do. It is that complete, consummate devotion to the headship of Christ over his church that cost Jan Hus his life in 1415. The church, the authority of Christ and his headship, is going to be the theme of the Resolved Conference this year.
Okay, and that is the end of that video. Okay, I heard it came from the Millerite movement. SDA originated from one heretical group called Christian Connexion. Now, I'm not saying you're wrong, Nick, but I'm not familiar with 19th century spelling of connection that way. To my understanding, connection was always spelled the way we spell it today. So I'm not saying you're wrong. I just find that spelling very interesting. Joseph Bates was a member... Oh, maybe it was a typo. That was probably a typo. Never mind. Joseph Bates was a member of this group as well as James White. That's why Ellen White taught Jesus was an angel. Now, I don't know who James White is. Do you mean our James White, like the Calvinist Baptist James White, or do you mean a historical James White from this group? Do comment that. I'm rather interested. Okay. Now, that is the end of the video there, so we're going to stop sharing our screen. Oh, by the way, this is James. Oh, James was the. Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha. Oh, Jamie and Nick. I don't mind you going at it in the comments, but do me both. Both of you do me a solid. Do keep it civil, because I would rather this channel be devoted more towards education. And so while debate is absolutely a positive, be sure to treat each other charitably and civilly. Okay, now we're going to share our screen for one more time. I want to show you something that Got Answers Ministries doesn't even believe this nonsense. Here, this is the article, Who was Jan Hus? Jan Hus was a Roman Catholic priest in Bohemia who became a pre-Protestant Reformation reformer of the church. Well, again, I don't agree with that, because if he was a pre-Protestant Reformation reformer, how do you reform without a Reformation? You can say that he was a precursor to the Reformation without ever being a reformer, and rather his works inspired a foundation for the Reformation, but it's not the same as saying he was a reformer, because he wasn't. I mean, John Wycliffe was not a reformer either, even though he called for reform. He didn't do it under the same pretenses that the Reformation would. Now, okay, Hus earned a doctorate degree and became a preacher at Bethlehem Chapel in Prague. The more he studied the Bible, he noticed a sharp divergence between what the Bible teaches and what the Roman Catholic Church practiced. In his day, he might have had a point, sure. Reading from the writings of John Wycliffe further influenced Jan Hus in his anti-Catholic direction. Was it anti-Catholic, though? Was it? I mean, really? Was it what? Okay, and listen, that's okay, Nick. I'm also anti-SDA in a sense. I'm definitely against their doctrines. Again, absolutely. I want you two to debate. I want you two to intellectually tear each other apart, but do make sure to keep it civil. That's all, by all means. So keep at it. I'm in all understanding. I want you to destroy Jamie on this issue, and I want Jamie to put up a very good defense, because that's what the Pale Galilean is all about. I want this channel to be centered around education. So as long as that's understood, that's fine. Okay. Now moving on. So, did Jan Hus really become anti-Catholic? Did he? Now, if anti-Catholic here means in contradiction to certain norms of the church, such as the authority of the Pope, yeah, I'd agree with that. Again, once more, I have to ask, was he like Charles Spurgeon, which absolutely decried the idea of the priesthood or the existence of a pope at all? Of course not. That's ridiculous. He never did that. Did he ever anathematize the idea of priestly reconciliation, or the sacrament of penance, more commonly called? Of course not. He was a priest himself. He probably heard hundreds and thousands of confessions in his lifetime. It's not, again, so like using that terminology I don't like. It is not nuanced enough to suggest Jan Hus's position in the historical record. Bucking church directives, Jan Hus began to preach his sermons at Bethlehem Chapel in the Czech language instead of Latin. He also began teaching against Roman Catholic abuses in the University of Prague. These actions led to a conflict with Hus and his followers on one side, and the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire on the other. No significant consequences befell Hus, however, due to the fact that the Bohemian king supported him. And also, it's just what he was preaching against, while what he was preaching on, while not really appreciated, wasn't really something heretical he was doing either. Therefore, the church wouldn't have really had a case against him. It was to the point, and it was to the extent he became anti-papal, that really spelled out a fatal end for him. The conflict between Hus and the Roman Catholic Church greatly intensified when anti-Pope John the 23rd authorized the selling of indulgences to raise money for military conflicts against his rival Pope Clement. Hus began preaching against the papacy itself, emphasizing the authority of the Bible and the fact that Christ alone is the head of the church. Due to political pressure from Rome, the King of Bohemia could no longer protect Hus, and Hus was officially excommunicated. This isn't entirely accurate. What actually happened is Hus began to preach against aspects of the papacy. Then when the sale of indulgences began to happen by anti-Pope John 23rd, He preached against that. He preached against that anti-pope and the sale of indulgences, and he eventually down-spiraled into preaching against the papacy itself. So this is generally correct, but they're missing a couple steps here. In 1412, Jan Hus was commanded by Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund to come to Constance, Germany, and appear before the Council of Constance. Hus was granted safe passage, but when he arrived, was arrested and imprisoned. A mock trial occurred, and when Hus refused to recount his teachings, he was burned at the stake as a heretic. And it is said his last words were, "Lord Jesus, I endure this cruel death for you. I ask you to have mercy on my enemies." And certainly, how would I put this? I don't actually object to this. Certainly, Jan Hus was as zealous in his beliefs as I am in mine. But let's go down here real quick. The writings of Jan Hus. Hold on. There we go. The writings of Jan Hus against the selling of indulgences influenced Martin Luther and other early Protestant reformers. It is incorrect to refer to Jan Hus as a Protestant, however, as he held many Roman Catholic beliefs despite his strong opposition to papal authority and the selling of indulgences. So, got questions will not say the same things that John Macarthur did. This man didn't believe in the sole authority of the Bible. Who are you kidding? He was a Catholic priest. He did in so many ways. Even assuming that Jan Hus believed in sola scriptura, even assuming that, Jan Hus disagreed with John Macarthur on everything else. The man, in spite of being a heretic, was so utterly Catholic. So it's rather ridiculous to assume that he is a Protestant. God Answers Ministries. This garbage of a website is not going to say the same things that MacArthur is saying, and really, that should give one pause to imagine what exactly is MacArthur's foundation for saying this in the first place. It's ridiculous, simply put. Jan Hus set a tremendous example of refusing to submit to any authority that violates the teachings of Scripture. In that example, he is to be remembered and followed. So understand this. Even Got Questions Ministries is not saying the same things as John Macarthur. How put it? Should we really be? Oh, it stopped? Okay, what do you mean it stopped, Jamie? Let me see. Stop, Jamie. Let me see. Let me mute myself and find out what's going on. Okay, I'm back. Let me see. I hear what's going on with my mic now. Okay, I'm back. Let me see. I hear what's going on. Shut up. My mic now. Okay, there we go. All right. All right. So let me see here, because I'd rather not have a bad mic if I don't need to. Okay, how's this? Is it good? Okay. Hey, Lucas, what's going on? Oh, Chris, actually, your name's Chris. Yeah, unfortunately, you came at the tail end of this. We're kind of really winding it down now. But all of this is to say that John Macarthur doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, I don't even mean that as a insult to the man's character, which I'd argue there's very little of. But the fact of the matter is John Macarthur desperately wants Jan Hus to be on his side, and on so many issues, he's just not. Even assuming that sola scriptura is something Jan Hus believed, and let's be quite frank, it isn't. He still would not be on John Macarthur's side, because where they disagree, where their roads split ways, Jan Hus would not have hesitated to have John Macarthur burned at the stake for his beliefs. Because John Macarthur objects to the authority of the priesthood and the Pope. John Macarthur objects to the fact that objects to infant baptism. He objects to the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist. None of these things would have gone swimmingly with Jan Hus. In fact, and of course, to Jan Hus's own chagrin, the burning of heretics is not something Jan Hus would have objected to. And that's clearly something John Macarthur does. So ultimately, John Macarthur really wants to... how to put it? Oh, I love your sense of humor, Jamie. Yeah, no, that was actually for those of you that don't know, that is a quotation from a general, but during the Albigensian Crusade. And so, and again, that's a paraphrase, but essentially, this was actually before the Inquisition. There was the Crusades. Oh, there were the Crusades against the there were essentially three branches of Crusades. There were the Crusades against the Muslims. Then there were Crusades against the northern pagans, and Crusades against the Albigensians, or as we know them as the Cathars. That's how they called themselves. And the Cathars, they essentially were a New Age Gnostic sect of Christianity. And it was so repugnant to the Crusaders that this is essentially what they said. This is essentially what they said. This was before there was an Inquisition to authoritatively handle and legislate these things on a legislative matter. Okay, Jamie Russell has what's this? I'll rewind and watch. I am interested in what you come up with. I have some issues with early reformers. I don't care for Martin Luther, despite my anti-Catholic view. Hey, that's fine. I mean, I guess you and I would absolutely agree on that front. Jamie's asking me a question, I think. Okay, did the burnings think this would save a soul, or was it damnation, or was it a damnation when they couldn't recant? Okay. Let me see. Did the burnings think this would save the soul, or was it a damnation that they wouldn't recant? Well, the burning of heretics takes on a more symbolic gesture. Essentially, what was going on is that when heretics would pass away through natural causes or others, what they would do, they would essentially gather the heretics' bones and make relics out of them. Because again, reliquaries was something that was extremely common in medieval Europe, and that when you had someone you wanted to venerate, typically as a saint, and especially if he was a founder or a governing body member of your sect, you would take his bones and make a relic out of them. Heretical sects specifically had a vested interest in doing this, as so they could provide ground and legitimacy apart from the Catholic Church. Now, the burnings itself was a form of execution. In fact, burning at the stake was something that was seen long before the church, long before secular authorities started doing it with the auspices of the church. And essentially, what is going on is when someone would burn, when someone was burned, especially in the early medieval period, that was typically done because you were treasonous. And so when the secular authorities would burn a heretic at the stake, the church and state coming together to perform a common good, and common good was the definitive understanding of secularism in the medieval period. And so when you became a heretic, You not only were against the church, you therefore became in direct conflict with the state, because by opposing the church, you oppose the common good that both the church and the state are trying to pursue. So heretics were seen as immediately treasonous, blasphemous from ecclesiastical bodies, and treasonous from secular bodies. Now, whether or not their heresy warranted execution was something typically it was in the secular authorities' arena to carry out. Many heretics were simply exiled, which you might want to argue is actually a fate worse than death, arguably, and in given the time this is happening. But that's for a time and conversation another day. Typically, the reason that they were burned at the stake is because that was the way, the world over, that heretics would be punished capitally. Specifically, how would I put it, traitors would be punished. And Nick Don, what do you got to say? I read somewhere that Hus was in charge of a chapel which had become the center of his growing national reform and behavior. What kind of church was this? It was a Catholic church. It definitely appealed more to a vernacular language. In this case, it would have been the Czech language, and the reason that was doing it is because essentially when Hus was preaching, he wanted as many people as possible to understand what he was saying, and so preaching exclusively in the Latin isn't something that was just pragmatic for what he wanted to do. Okay, what does Chris got to say? Luther was also was an a-whore to Karlstadt. I think I'm pronouncing that name right. And hated Anabaptists. That's mainly why I don't care for Luther. He also lost the Sola Scriptura debate. He certainly did. The thing with Luther, to be quite frank, is that here's the thing about that. When it comes to Anabaptists, Luther himself is to blame for their existence. They basically took his beliefs and simply took them steps further, steps that he no doubt was uncomfortable with, but essentially he only has himself to blame for their existence. What's this going on here? I've heard both claims that they did it to purge them of heresy, but it was also meant to warn others being heretics and send them straight to hell. I've heard both claims too, but I've heard essentially no evidence to suggest that the former claim is true, that they were being purged of heresy. Now, they were given one more chance to recant of their heresy, and one more chance to, they were given one more chance to recant of their heresy, and one more chance to be reconciled to the church again. In fact, what was the name? Crap, I forget it. But essentially, there is a book out called "The Spanish Inquisition: A Historical Revision." Actually, give me a minute. I think you can grab it out here real quick. Okay, I'm back. I found it. It is the book "The Spanish Inquisition: A Historical Revision" by Dr. Henry Kamen. He is a Spanish PhD, and he did his dissertation on the Spanish Inquisition. And the reason he calls it a historical revision is because essentially he uses this book to essentially nuke from orbit a lot of the utterly dumb things that are said about the Spanish Inquisition, and he's essentially revising the popular myths surrounding the Inquisition for and submitting the way it actually worked. Now, in it, he actually uses a particular man that is being burned at the stake because, well, he was a heretic, and his execution has already been. His execution has already been determined. So he's given one more last chance to recant, and then he does, and is reconciled to the Catholic Church then. And by so doing then, he no longer dies the death of a traitor. He is hung instead, and then his corpse is burned. But in both cases, Jamie, the corpse, the physical body of the heretic is burned. The reason is because, the reason that it's burned is because people would probably make relics out of this man. Oh, and Gambit, we're not coming to Islam, but we're having a very different conversation. If you want to have a conversation regarding this, feel free to drop something in. Okay, church state nightmare. I would agree, but again, that's not something that's not something Christianity believes in. The medieval world just had a different form of secularism than we did now, and in my opinion, it is utterly something. The medieval period was something completely, how would I say? It is a form of secularism I find more fascinating. In fact, I find better to what kind of secularism we have today. Okay. Burning someone is against Islamic law. It should never be used to execute even the worst enemy. Well, typically, how would I put it? Typically, how you would make the mistake in thinking it was the fire that killed these people. But I can understand why you would have that that understanding of history, because it's so popular in today's culture. What was really happening is there were ethical ways this would be done. Typically, what would happen is that they would usually surround the condemned with gunpowder, so that when the wood was lighted and the fire reached the gunpowder, the condemned was killed immediately. Essentially, the burning at the stake was meant for one thing, two things symbolically. First, it was meant symbolically as the burning away of sin from your society. Secondly, the burning at the stake was done so that relics couldn't be gathered. There was a pragmatic and symbolic reason for this. But typically, when people are burned at the stake, as seen in modern culture, we tend to think that we just pour gasoline on them and light them up, a lot like how ISIS did to that one man in 2013. That's not something that's not the way that the Europeans did it. When the Catholic secular authorities would burn people at the stake, they knew just how excruciating that burning someone alive could be. Hence why they would go out of their way to make it ethical. Another way of doing it, not only would they surround someone with gunpowder, but they might also tie him higher up on the stake, so that it was smoke inhalation that would kill him instead of the burning. So in both cases, there are ways in most cases, when burning at the stake was done, it was done in ethical ways. So it's not this horror show that modern society often portrays it as. Although, unfortunately, that did happen too. Let's see. We leave punishment for Allah to administer. Okay. Alright. That's an interesting point you made about the Anabaptists. I never thought about it, but you're right. Okay. Here. Luther changed his name as Jonker Jorge after the Reformation. Is it true? I don't really know how. I don't know how to spell his second name in German. I don't know if that is true. I don't know. I don't know, because Jorge here seems to be the Spanish variant of George, and so I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it's not true, but I'm not an authority on that. It quite possibly could be true. I just don't know. All right. So De Ecclesia was important because it basically served as you might say, the root and stem of Hus's error. And what had ultimately happened there is that because how should I say this? Many of the claims he makes out from his book, from his works. That's where they are. Yeah, okay, so I think Jamie's right here. I heard it with... Oh, never mind, he's just joking. Okay. Never mind. Okay, so when it came to De Ecclesia, much of the crimes against him, charged against him, were written in that work. That's why it was so important. So when it was published, that alone made up about half the charges against him in the Council of Constance. And with that, unless anyone has questions for me in the next minute that I can answer real quick, I think I'm going to wrap it up. Okay. All right. I don't think Gambit ever said anything here. Yeah, I want the current comment hid. Okay, I'm going to assume that everybody is satisfied with the questions they gave and have no new ones. But if anyone does have further questions they want, by all means, just leave it in the comments below. All right. Okay, could you do this? Yeah, I'm gonna have to know more about Pope Benedict's theology first. I have a couple books on it, so maybe I can at least make an introductory level video. But yeah, I can at least make an introductory level video. But I don't know enough about Pope Benedict's theology to make a competent series. Whose bones are under the Vatican? A bit off topic, but sure. Essentially, the bones. How to put it? Underneath the Vatican is how to say this? The word is escaping me at the moment. Okay, yeah. Underneath the Vatican is a series of catacombs, and these catacombs are Christian saints and martyrs. The reason they are there is because when Hellenists Hellenists never buried their dead, they would make a funeral pyre and burn the corpse. And essentially the smoke of the corpse was essentially that person ascending up to the gods, right? And at least I could be articulating that wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. In any case, so one way or another, Hellenists burned their dead, but Christians were the ones who buried them. And this isn't entirely true. For instance, how do I say this? I think Emperor Augustus has a mausoleum, but I don't know if it holds his skeleton there as much as maybe his ashes. In either case, the reason there's bones underneath the Vatican is because there's a catacomb there full of Christian saints, and the most prized of them are the bones of Saint Peter. In fact, his niche that they found was marked Petros, and in big Greek letters. And so we've said that those are essentially the bones of Saint Peter, and he too was buried there along with all of his brethren. Okay. Let me see. Okay, tell me where I could donate where I can donate to all your hard work. Well, if you want to donate, thank you for thinking I'm worth the time of doing that. I'm going to have to set up something like Patreon or at least Google Super Chat. I don't want to do Patreon so much because I would like to think that my work is being valued. So I feel like if you're forced to for giving a payment every month, I feel that's holding you at gunpoint, at least at a soft gunpoint. So I might set up a super chat system here every now and then. If you feel like donating to me, I guess I can set that up then. But typically, if you're gonna fund me, I'd rather have one-time donations through super chat or PayPal, something like that. Okay. Let's see. Such a pile. I have no idea what you're trying to say, Jamie, but okay. Yeah, I know. I'm not even done with it yet, but right now school's in the way. Once the semester lets up, I'll have a lot more time to make a lot more content here. The reason I'm able to do this is because I'm able to donate at least an hour of my time to responding to Macarthur. All right. I think that will about cover it. I'm going to put this up now and end the stream. Thank you for all 6 people who have been here. It's been a pleasure. Viva Christa Rey, and remember, pray the rosary. And this has been another installment of The Pale Galilean. Bye-bye. God bless all of you.